Hi everyone, welcome to another Digital Building Week session. We're really excited about this one. It's got another great panel for you. So today's afternoon topic is how can digital twins be used to improve building safety? I'm Jordan Marshall, Chief Reporter at Building, and I'm joined by Ed Gibbs, Scott Sanderson, and Ben Jowett. So the way the session is going to run today is that each of our speakers is going to give a presentation on the topic before coming together for a Q&A. So we'd love for our audience members to get involved as we go. Please send through questions at any point and we'll try and get through as many of them as we can in the group discussion. For everyone who will ask this, because we get this multiple times every session, yes, the session will be available on demand after the conclusion. It will still be free, so send the link to your colleagues, watch it again, catch up on bits you might want to get clarification on. It'll be available by the same link you've used to come here today. That's probably enough for me to kick things off. So I'm going to hand over to Scott to start things off for us.
Right. So, am I sharing okay?
Yeah, good. That's perfect.
Brilliant, thank you. Thanks, Jordan. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Scott Sanderson. I'm a partner at PRP. And just very, very briefly to orientate me and the business I work for, we are a large design consultancy. Our core business is architecture. And I'm an architect, and my dominant focus is on technical design, the delivery of our projects, project management, and BIM. Just by way of a couple of examples to give you a feel for the type of work we do, the image on screen is our Clapham Park project, which is a regeneration scheme comprising 1,200 new homes in Clapham. One of our recently completed projects, well, this is a photograph under construction, but now recently completed, a large building for Quintain adjacent to Wembley Stadium, which is build to rent. But we also do low-rise housing, urban extensions, master planning, etc. We're multidisciplinary to an extent. We've got architects in-house, master planning, landscape. We've got what we call our development consultancy team, which includes fire engineers, quality inspectors, clerk works, project managers, etc. And we are heavily invested in BIM. I like to say we're one of the early adopters in the sector for BIM technology. All of our projects, of course, developed in 3D from concept stage, and we're BSI accredited as a Tier 1 lead consultant. So some thoughts to inform today's discussion. I guess the first thing that comes to mind is the current socio-political context that we're all working in. And there's numerous examples week after week of the challenges that our clients face and our sectors face and individual tenants and leaseholders face related to fire and fire safety. And it seems to me that we're working our way through a period where we face a fundamental value shift. And the conversations, the classic conversations, I guess, around quality, program, and cost are swinging. So whereas a market that's been dominated over many years by design and build that placed high value on late decision making and speculation is much more focused on early decisions, fixity, and certainty on quality. And we're challenged also, I think correctly, to achieve a culture shift. Practical experience all through the supply chain, whether that's design activity, whether that's work on site, is too often demonstrating that quality standards are unacceptably low. And there's regulation ahead of us beginning to be implemented that is seriously going to challenge the sector to shift culture and shift process. And I think certainly what I see is that is challenging our clients to take a much wider view of their project information requirements, and perhaps specifically just looking at the whole life cycle of a building or any property asset, and think more precisely and at a more detailed level about what information is relevant, who should provide it at each stage, how it's captured, how it's hosted and passed on. And just, I guess, to illustrate what I would describe as a shift towards granular compliance, it's an example here of some work that we now do internally, which is we have developed approved product lists over the last couple of years, where we look at different components or systems within a building. We've had an early focus on facades for obvious reasons, and we actively and forensically review the products available in the market, and we are scheduling and categorizing the products that we're prepared to specify. And that's to make sure that we're confident on compliance ourselves, and that the evidence base sits there behind the decisions that we make and the products that we specify. And I think we also see significant challenge around digital maturity and skills all through the supply chain. As I say, we'd like to think of ourselves as early adopters and now mature digitally, but I think the reality still, it's a very mixed picture out there in practice, in project teams, through the supply chain and at different scales of project. So assembling teams that can collaborate effectively, deliver to the standards that will be required, and in terms of correct formats, validation, etc., I think still remains a challenge. There are teams that collaborate successfully and are working to very high standards, but the overall picture, I'd submit, is still very mixed across the sector. One area that I think is particularly interesting is field applications, and I just give this as an example of the maturing sector and how technology is shifting to support the high quality use of digital information during construction and data capture to track, monitor, quality control work in progress, and to provide real-time access to construction activity and an enduring digital record. And I think there's responding to the drive for quality and compliance, there are some amazing new technologies that are now out there and readily available. And I guess the final thought is just how we piece all of this together so that we network information, we collate, curate, host, and maintain accurate, high-quality digital information for the immediate benefit of a project in delivery, and more importantly, perhaps longer term, the downstream maintenance use of the building and safely or demonstrating safety through the safety case review.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Scott. I think that's a great way to kick off the conversation. I think we'll just roll straight into our next presenter, who's Ben. So Ben, if I can ask you to turn your camera and mic back on, and I've just made you the presenter, so you should have all that access now.
Great, hopefully that's working.
Yep, if you just pop it into display mode for us, that would be excellent. Perfect.
Is that okay? Great.
Perfect.
Hi everyone, my name is Ben Jowett, BIM manager for Waits Construction. I've been at Waits for coming up 4 years now, based in the north of England. I originally studied construction management, and then I transitioned into BIM and currently undertaking a PhD looking specifically at the application of mobile BIM technology, so how we can better leverage models in the field. So where digital engineering stroke BIM sits within Wates is now aligned with an entity that we have within the Wates Construction Group called Wates Integrated Construction Services, which is made up of a few different businesses. So we have the Prism Offsite Manufacturing, Wates Building Services, which is our self-delivery MEP model, Wates Dry Lining Services, again self-delivering dry lining, and then we have SES Engineering Services, who obviously work actively in the market and in the digital space. All these businesses are supported by what we call the Technical Excellence Centre, which is made up of specialists in specific areas. So such as myself and the BIM team, we represent BIM in the Technical Excellence Centre, but equally we also have specialists in facades, temporary works, mechanical services and electrical services. And the idea behind this is to bring together all our expertise into sort of one banner to serve the whole group. So what tools are we currently using within the business that can be used to assist health and safety? So this is across our construction group. I'm just going to give a flavour of some of the tools that we are using, but then build on that to suggest how that may look in a digital twin in the future. So first off, in our Prism Offsite manufacturing facility, we generate 3D models that are then used to fabricate from. And the benefit of, obviously there's multiple benefits of offsite fabrication, but the benefit for health and safety is building up that data at the point of fabrication and manufacture, rather than waiting to site to sort of retrospectively embed that data. So the benefits of that is obviously the shift of effort earlier in the life cycle of the project, but equally we can assure that the data is more accurate and we're not having to chase specification sheets or product data sheets to try and find out what we've installed, because we can do that in a controlled environment, thereby giving us a greater assurance of the delivery. Once that's delivered to site, there's various tools that can be used to view models in the field. So there's a sample on the screen there where we can access models via a smartphone or tablet, and then use that to compare against the real world and then assign tasks against objects. So for example here, where SFS needs cutting back in a door opening, it doesn't necessarily need to be an issue such as this. It could be the fire stopping is incorrect for this service penetration or anything, but the point being that we now have tools on site that are building up a data record of activity on site and the things that are actually happening on site, and in effect that on-site decision making process, which is a big part of that golden thread of information that we continuously allude to. Another aspect that we're now starting to see within industry and within Wates is leveraging the models more for data-driven risk management. So obviously we have the PAS 1192 Part 6 currently in place for the management of risk information in a BIM environment. So there's a sample there where we're now placing 3D object placeholders within a model that can be represented in 3D or 2D, and then obviously embedding the risk information within that object. Again, if that is held in a native file, then that could be pushed out to the field, so people on site could then see what those risk issues are with that particular interface of the building, or indeed it could be passed into a COBie spreadsheet for delivery at handover, the point being that it's continuously embedded in that object, so it can be accessed at any point in the life cycle and then be enriched as we progress through the design and build and handover process. So an example here of where we're actually accessing that health and safety information in the field, and then also supplementing with on-site information. So you have the 2D contextual view of where you are in a particular building, looking at the 3D, selecting a ceiling, but then also applying specific risk information to a ceiling, for example. So when someone's installing it, they can provide that feedback loop to the design team to say, you may need step ladders to reach this ceiling or something along those lines. You can take that example and apply it to any aspect of a building, but the point being of, again, enriching the model through on-site information that can then be handed over to the next party in the life cycle of the asset. Another aspect is planning in the field. Obviously, there's various tools that interface with programs and planning now. So there's Aster Power Project that we use within the business that can obviously leverage the 3D models and assign tasks to them. Again, building up a database of how long activities take on site. So the example here that we've got is SFS. You can then actually assign, the actual durations that things have taken, but equally, as suggested under 1192 Part 6, you can also assign risk information to a task. It doesn't necessarily have to be assigned to an object. So there's multiple different ways that you can assign that, and again providing that feedback loop from the supervisors on site of saying this is how long it should have taken, this is how long it actually took, and why did it take longer, or why was it shorter, and there may be inherent risk information embedded within that data as well. Fire protection data, so similarly to interfacing with a model in the field, we can also record, fire stopping. So there's an example of a system that we've used on a project in Leeds, where we log every single interface of fire stopping, when it was signed off, who signed it off, and the fire rating of it, the size of it, and again enriching this database of information that could potentially then be passed back into a model or held as a separate database. And again, this is where the whole aspect of a digital twin comes into play, is that integration of data silos into a consistent whole. Augmented reality is another growing use of models in the field. So this particular instance, we're overlaying an education facility model with the real world, so we can actually see where components should be in the building and see it in context. So for example, as you can see on the image on the right hand side, there's examples of service penetrations going through a wall. Are they actually lining up with the design intent, or is there any potential on-site clashes or inherent risks with installing that? We can see what we want to build, but are there any obstructions in the way that are preventing us from doing that? Augmented reality can assist with those sorts of things. And again, we're starting to see ground penetrating radar, where we use augmented reality to see what's in the ground. I've seen examples of that now. Again, that could be another piece of information that can enrich an overall entity such as a digital twin in terms of what's in the ground as much as what's above ground. Point cloud data and drone data. So we've been starting to use drones and point clouds on some projects. So there's some example screenshots here. So the top row is an example of point cloud data captured by drones, which again can compare the design intent versus the real world state. And you can align the two models and understand where there's discrepancies. But again, a key missing part of that, which is where the digital twin may come in, is to feed back from those point clouds and integrate into a digital twin to provide that feedback loop of, well, this wall wasn't quite built there, it was built here, and why was that the case, and building up that trail of why that happened. Similarly, on the top right, you can see where we've got topographical information and a heat map to see, how high or low the ground is, and whether it's suitable to be used for construction yet. And then the bottom two screenshots are actually from an existing building, where we've used point cloud information of an existing structure to actually survey roofs that are unsafe for access by a human. Again, this building is an existing asset, so you will potentially argue that this point cloud survey could then become in effect a digital twin that you can assign data to. In areas that are unsafe for access, you could say, well, I can actually see, where the cracks on the roof are or in the coping stones, because I've got a digital replica of what that building is, and we don't actually have to physically visit the asset to see it. Progress capture is another element, and 360 images. We're trialing some software on one of our projects in Leeds, where we use the 360 image captures on hard hats to create in effect like a Google Street View around the building, and then that interfaces with the live federated model, so you immediately get a comparison of this is what the design intent is, and this is what the actual state is. And there are some clever tools now, when we see the emergence of artificial intelligence, that can potentially automatically detect how much of a floor is complete versus what the model is telling us, how many walls are up versus what the model is telling us. You've even got tools now that are auto-detecting imagery to try and find health and safety risks. So, for example, an AI could potentially detect where there's not sufficient edge protection on the edge of an open slab. So, again, the possibilities are endless. So there's a flavour of some of the tools that we've experienced of using. And one of the things that I just wanted to link back to the digital twin with, currently under an ISO 19650 process, or a sort of a BIM process, is we have very clear segmented stages and packages of information that pass from one stage to another, in effect, in exactly that, in packages. And that is fit for purpose under an ISO 19650 process, but what that doesn't quite recognise is the level of integration required to facilitate something such as a digital twin. So we may generate a 3D model, we may generate drawings, we may generate COBie, but there may be little integration between those once they are loaded into a CAFM system, for example. So there's obviously varying definitions currently in academia and industry as to what constitutes a digital twin, but I think a common underpinning of it is you have a physical asset, a digital asset, and some level of integration between the two, and that could potentially lead to automation as well when we're talking about sensors and automatic feeding back into a digital twin to understand the performance of the building. But if we just take that foundation of a digital twin, I've sort of transposed the difference between the two really, where we have an ISO 19650 process where you have documents and data embedded within common data environments that pass from stage to stage. Under a digital twin process, that really should be just one digital model throughout that is the source of all bits of information at every stage, so that it could host construction data, you know, how long did a particular aspect of the building take to build. It could host product data, it could include monitoring and sensors, it could include all sorts of bits and pieces that are enriched through each stage of a project lifecycle. So where I led to with that line of thinking was with a digital twin, and you were actually interfacing with a digital twin based on some of the tools that I've shown there and how could they be leveraged within a digital twin environment. I imagine being an end user and just clicking on a typical object within a building. So I took a door as an example, but it could be any object in the building. And these are the sort of queries that you would want to ask of that object. And if you actually consider where the source of that information may be derived from currently under a 19650 process, that is still a relatively unwieldy process to try and find. Obviously, we've got things like file naming structures and classification that try and assist with that. But the idea of using an object as a repository of data, so I can click on a door and I can say, right, who designed this and when, who approved it and when, who installed it and when, who maintained it and when, who altered it, who moved it, what risks are associated with this object when I'm building it or when I'm maintaining it. All these different questions that could be answered through a digital twin environment and supported by the tools that I've shown I really think can have a massive benefit to the health and safety of a built asset throughout all project stages. And that is it from me.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Ben. Another great presentation. I'm sure some great insight. I just want to let our audience know, while we will have all the presentations first, do keep those questions coming through. Some have already started to roll in, but I don't want anyone to feel like they've got to hold it and then try and remember. Please feel free to send them through at any point. Next, we're going to hear from Ed Gibbs. So I'm going to hand over presenter control to you now, Ed. Sorry, there you go. And that should be with you now. Perfect. If you just pop that in full screen.
Yeah. Is that okay?
It's just still, we can just still see the full as in all PowerPoint.
Okay.
I think if you just go to the end one where it's got from beginning, it'll.
Say again, sir.
So on that top panel, the end one will start it from the start. So where slideshow, if you can go down across the panel to from beginning, it should put it into presenter mode.
I've got multiple screens here, so apologies. That's where
It's still taking up most of the screen now, so we can just push ahead with it like that. It's still big enough and clear enough to read, so it's fine.
Okay, great. So thanks to Scott and Ben, given some really good insight into both some good examples across the number of different applications for digital twin. I'm Ed Gibbs from Digital Lead for Arcadis UK, and Arcadis are one of the larger sustainability engineering consulting solutions businesses for natural and built assets who work right away across the life cycle. So I think, as we've established already, that if we ask all people listening for the definition of digital twin, we'll probably come up with a number of different definitions, and that's really partly the challenge here. As you can see on the left-hand side, the infinity loop showing the interaction between both the physical and the digital environment, but also between the physical and the human environment, and to see what impact humans have both in construction and design construction and in use for that asset. And that leads us to the different levels of maturity of digital twin. I know that Scott and Ben both mentioned that technically a relatively low-level integration between BIM and, let's say, GIS also constitutes a digital twin, so that if you make any changes to the design of an asset, then you can see the impact or consequence of those changes in another element of the asset, like the space around it, the GIS or the data that it's integrated with. But one of the challenges we do have is that varying maturity of the digital twin. So if we look at a couple of these as an example, information twin and operational twin imply that there is different levels of integration of data. So for a particular asset, then two or three levels of data integration would constitute a twin, whereas an operational twin would include the in-use data streaming from BMS or from another source to understand the whole life cycle of that asset and how it works and the impact of use of that asset over time. We then look at, in this instance, level 3, the connected twin. So from an environment, or looking at a wider geography, connecting different twins can also provide intelligence around a community, a city, or even a broader level of information, looking at both travel and transport and some of the other data streams that are available that do have an impact on individual assets, and then also collectively have an impact on society around them, bringing together the physical, the digital, and the human-centric that I mentioned earlier. We also then see, from a sort of technical perspective, the different layers of capability from a digital twin and how that impacts on building safety. And both Scott and Ben provided some really good detailed examples of how that can work. If we look from the digital technical perspective, so the collective intelligence, aggregating data, vast amounts of data, which help us to then make projections or predictions very accurately by aggregating and collecting data across multiple assets, similar types of assets, similar situations, similar circumstances. Of course, that would need some level of standardization of that data in order to pull on the aggregated data sets. Now, that in itself being partly the challenge of standardization. If we then look at artificial intelligence and how can that affect building safety? Well, for one, artificial intelligence doesn't get stressed or tired or unwell. So relying on digital processes, automation can help to reduce incidents and improve building safety by calling on and relying on the digital twin model to make decisions and to carry out processes. Analytics techniques to predict and prevent workplace incidents. So with a reliable digital twin where you do have some historic data to call upon to make predictive assessments of both the materials, and the incidents of that are taking part within the asset itself. And then removing the need for human activity. Both Scott and Ben looked at different ways of collecting data during the manufacturing, the construction process, to using different tools, digital cameras and AR, VR to represent human interaction. And by taking people off site, by reducing the likelihood of the opportunity for errors, that in itself will improve or can improve building safety. When you're looking at things like clash detection, snagging, and those sorts of elements remotely, you're looking at you're directly comparing the as is with the model, with the construction design. You're likely to get a much more accurate assessment of any safety rating issues within the model. So happy to open up that to more questions and dialogue, but ultimately we see the challenge for digital twin being the lack of sort of standardization and consistency, which is being addressed through the 19650 and BIM standards. But I think that, as I think Scott showed, the different REBA stages across the asset life cycle, when we're transferring data from one stage to the next, we need regulation to instill those standards to make sure that that data is consistent and that we're transferring data that can be reused by different stakeholders at a different stage of the asset life cycle. So thanks very much.
Thanks so much for that. That was another really great one. I'll ask everyone to turn their cameras back on and join us now, and I'll just turn the screen share off so that we can all see each other. Sorry, just do that. Brilliant. Okay, so I think a good way to kick off the discussions part of the session now would actually be pick up on a point that we were discussing offline before the session started, all about, well, it's great to have these ambitions and to talk about how digital twins, could deliver all these great aspects for building safety and helping to, correct some of the issues that construction's had in those areas moving forward. Realistically, where are we now, and how? It's all points you've all covered on, but it would be great to hear you guys' thoughts in a more discursive manner, I think. Scott, I know that you had some thoughts to start things off, and then as and when others want to jump in, I think that's a great way for us to start. Okay,
thank you. Was interesting. I think Ben's presentation shows the potential and the direction of travel. I think the trajectory for the sector is good, and that best practice in the sector looks radically different to best practice 3, 4, 5 years ago. If you look at some of the technologies that Ben showed in the real life application. So I say direction of travel looks very positive. If one thinks about the timeline for the implementation of the Building Safety Bill 2023, which is part of the focus of today's discussion, I think it's how do you get the whole sector up to a place where maybe your baseline is digital ready twin level 0, picking up on Ed's terminology. So again, direction of travel from my perspective looks positive, but it's actually what's the common baseline.
Oh, I think you're on mute there.
Yeah, I think you're muted, Jordan.
Great, I did that to myself. That's excellent. I was just saying, Ben, Ed, did either of you want to pick up off the back of that?
Yeah, I think for me, there's two blockers that are really stopping us from reaching the potential of a digital twin or an aspiration to a digital twin. I think the first one is the technology is clearly there. If you think historically, direction of travel in industry, when you look at all the historical reports, has all been around collaboration and partnering and forms of procurement and all those sorts of things. And in the more recent past, we've seen a massive trajectory of technology that's injected into that, and procurement hasn't quite caught up. So I think one of the big blockers to enable what we would call an old level 3 or a digital twin, whatever you want to call it, a big part of it is procurement. I think we're getting better in terms of partnering, and we're seeing alliance in forms of contracts and all those sorts of things, but I don't think there's sufficient provision to work in such an integrated manner with technology. So I think that there does need to be attention on forms of procurement and forms of contracts to actually enable that to happen. And equally, the technology is there, but if we want to work in the spirit of interoperability and use tools that are fit for purpose rather than a one-size-fits-all approach, we need to be a lot better at data integration, a lot better. There are systems that do great things, but they don't talk to other systems. And I see that as another big blocker that will really unlock. If we can get over that as an industry and better integrate all our data sets and have that true single source of truth, as everyone likes to coin it, the integration is the key to that. So I would say those two things that are really stopping us from unlocking the potential of a digital twin.
Ben, I'd agree with that. I agree that the technology is definitely there, and the integration, the way that we are currently largely doing it, is by asset, independently integrating data sets and models. Until we can do that at scale, I think the commercial model is going to be really tight to developing the digital twin as a viable commercial model. One of the challenges, of course, as we saw through the RIBA stages, we're handing off to different stakeholders, different parties throughout that life cycle. And the challenge being, of course, the effort that we put in up front is realized downstream. And so why should the people up front, who are independent of the people downstream, fund the development of and the integration and the standardization, the structure of the data and so on, if there's an additional expense or cost to having to do that? So I think we need to think holistically, and I think that taking your points, we need to think holistically and say, what is the absolute return or opportunity for digital twins, and how do we apportion the relevant costs throughout that life cycle in order to make sure that it's fair and equitable for the different stakeholders throughout that journey.
Did anyone have anything else they want to jump in with there, or should we move on to another question we've had come in from our audience?
I think something, Jordan, I'll just add to that. It's also, particularly again in the context of the current safety agenda and the incoming building safety bill, it's what's the kind of output objective from the information gathering. So almost all these discussions involve an expanding reach for data gathering, more and more data entries, more and more model information, more and more content to be managed and hosted digitally. But ultimately, actually, the questions being asked of the sector is very, very simple. Is the building safe, yes or no? And can somebody sign it off, which is a tick? So the massive challenge, I think, is to host all of this data, but basically to funnel it up to a very simple binary yes or no response. So as well as organizing, managing, hosting the data, there's got to be a framework for competent signing off of compliance that delivery gets you to a point where a massive project team often can get to a point where a limited number of individuals or businesses will say, yes, it's okay to occupy.
Yeah. Agree, Scott. Just pick up on that very good point. So from the Building Safety Act, as a consequence of the Hackett review, it focuses, one of the key elements that I took away from that, it focuses on an outcomes-based standard. And the challenge isn't on the outcomes. The challenge for us is on the inputs, and it's on the how do you create the standardized input in order to deliver the outcome. So I accept that regulation is certainly moving more towards an outcomes-based element. We're seeing that in a number of different industries and sectors. The challenge that we have is that consistency up front of that ingestion and collection of data. I would agree with that point.
which actually segues quite nicely into a question that we've had come in from one of our audience members, asking how do you actually manage that huge amount of data that is both needed and created in this process, and how do you make sure everyone's systems are speaking to each other and it's one single source and not different people taking from different points, and like validation processes to make sure that everything going in is right for everybody? If anyone wants to jump in first,
I think for me that almost sits under procurement and forms of contracting, in terms of you're contracted to deliver information deliverables and they get validated against. And if we're shifting to a digital twin environment and then we start introducing automation, where does that sit in that world? If we're getting automated information and data from a system that has had little human input and we just accept that as the truth, does that need to go through any approval gateways, or do we accept, you know, that the technology is giving us the right answer? So I think we're in this halfway house of, we have the technology, but we still want to adopt a human input into it to say this person has seen it and said it is okay. And again, that comes back to how things are procured and how the form of contract sets up a team to work in that way.
I think then to rely on an algorithm to see whether a bridge remains standing or you know is asking something. I agree.
Yeah.
Jordan, I'd add that I think teams are really challenged to put quality time into planning at the start of project. It's always the case that there's pressure to move quickly, to drive decisions, to drive design development, to drive procurement. But actually the first thing to do is to set the right brief. And it's very, very challenging to stop, draw breath, get the right people in a room and drill the brief to a level of detail that we haven't done before, because it's the right brief that sets the right pathway. All of this is extremely difficult and painful if you try to reverse engineer it, but it can be planned efficiently from the get-go, but it's a big time investment. It's where consistency is important. Teams that work together regularly, clients and project teams to look beyond a single project to a wider vision, I guess, of collaborative, team-based, successful development of a process that delivers the outcomes we're looking for.
I think also, just to sort of circle back as well, how could that potentially be managed? Obviously, under the 19650 process, we have a master information delivery plan that lists out all the information containers that need to be delivered under the contract. And again, under a digital twin environment, or what one may look like, we may not be necessarily talking about information containers, we may be talking specifically about data requirements. So does the MIDP need an extension? And it's not just information containers, but well, I need this sensor data from this piece of plant because this feeds into this system. And it needs a more all-encompassing minded thought when you're putting that document together. If we're to really talk about integration and automation, it's like, well, what are all the other data sets you need? Not just COBie, but what do you need out of your plant room to help your CAFM system tick? It's an extension of 19650, really.
Yeah. You know, and in the, you know, let's say in the medium term, again, Building Safety Bill maybe 2023 is, let's say, what's the short list for structure and fire safety? You know, what's the validated data set for safety case review and occupying a building?
On part of that, you know, Building Safety Bill hack review sort of thread of conversation, one of the key terms that keeps coming up is golden thread of information, and the idea of how much can, first of all, the systems and levels that we currently have in place help contribute to that, and then moving towards a digital twin environment, how would that all work integrating together?
Yeah, I think the golden thread in the context of the Hackett report is calling for a couple of things, specifically with digital. I think the first one, it links back to that theme of integration of data. So for example, we may go out on site and use a tablet and we may populate snagging lists or QA checks. How well does that feed back into an overall sort of data pool? So does that feed back into the model, or does it exist in its own entity and it can't be accessed? And then equally leading on from that, I think the second aspect is transparency. How much of that data needs to be pushed to the next stage and what doesn't. So does a QA check on some fire stopping need to be pushed back to the owner occupier? You would argue yes. But how is that data captured and structured and fed back into a central system? And I think that's the missing part in terms of, we're not just talking about COBie, we're talking about the whole data piece. So we're talking about field data, you know, who signed this off, who installed it, what's the serial number of it. Yes, that could be slotted into COBie as data, but it'd be quite an unwieldy COBie data sheet. Again, it's just using the data that's fit for purpose and making sure it integrates with the end in mind.
Yeah, I'd agree. The sort of golden thread is in its minimal form is sort of a digital twin light. You know, it's sort of the level 0. That is encouraging actually, because it still gets people to understand from a regulatory point of view that there is some downstream benefit of capturing and storing and transferring that data across that life cycle, and there's value to be generated there. But I agree, Ben. You know, obviously there are numerous data sources that can help to embellish and enrich that digital twin or that golden thread. But I think it's to call it a golden thread, I think is clever, because it allows people at the minimum level to start to build infrastructure that will evolve to become a digital twin. So I think it helps people at the ground level to understand, firstly, what's the value. Value is compliance, but also value is there is you know, commercial value also in generating that data and those platforms. So I think it's a good step in the right direction, and you can see that golden thread will become a part of a roadmap to building an asset, a digital twin, you know, by asset. Yeah.
I think much like 1192 was a call to industry to go out and sort it. The golden thread again is a call to arms, really, to go out and define it and develop the systems and processes that can deliver this end result. And you have to really put your mindset into, you know, if I'm an owner occupier of a building and I'm interfacing with a typical asset in my building, what do I want to know about it, and what history of that asset do I want to know? Who designed it? Who signed it off, and when was it changed? When was it maintained? Again, all those bits and pieces. And again, to do that at the moment, you're accessing multiple different systems. And again, that's where, you know, an aspirational digital twin in theory comes in, is all that data is sourced from one place.
Scott, do you have anything you wanted to add on that one, or
just to say, I think that as a concept, it's accessible for sure, and I think believable, and I think fits well with the gateway-led approach that's incoming. And you know, and then I find myself thinking just about sort of question set that we're asking on any specific system or facility. You know, is the facade safe is a question you can ask at planning. Is the facade safe is a question you can ask as you develop your tender and construction design. Is the facade safe is a question you can ask when the building's occupied, and you've got this data set that is growing that contributes to the response to that question. So I think you've got a kind of these threads which are compliance led, and then I think there's almost now kind of risk-based overlay, particularly with sort of HSE influence on regulation that's coming. So what questions do you ask and what responses do you want at each stage to demonstrate that the building is safe?
Brilliant. Just a quick one from me, and something that you have all touched on in passing, at least, is that traditionally the built environment firms have not necessarily been known for working collaboratively and well together at all times. And is there a risk of, you know, some of that siloed approach being a blocker to any of this continuing on that journey that we've been discussing?
Again, I would link that back to procurement and contracting. You know, if we're procured under a traditional form of contracting where people generally hold on to their information until they have to give it up, that sort of cultures that behaviour, and that's where things like NEC and these more progressive frameworks came in, and alliancing frameworks and all those good things, is to sort of break down those barriers. And I think a lot of the projects I've worked in construction have been in a collaborative form of contract. So I don't have much experience of the traditional old days in inverted commas. It's more the norm for me, and I think that's a sign of progression. But again, if we really want to make best use of technology, there's more steps to take to unlock those barriers even further.
I'd agree, Ben, and Scott, you mentioned the perfect brief, which we all aspire to, but I think certainly as part of that brief, the EIRs are going to be really specific, and exactly what information and standards are required as part of that brief. So to answer your point, Jordan, yes, it can be a blocker, but if they are standard minimum requirements of the brief that they're asked to respond to, very quickly the market will respond, and we'll need to generate both the capability and the technology platforms to be able to provide that data in the right way.
I think it was quite progressive in the new UK information management mandate as well, in terms of it was very specific in saying it was information management mandate. It wasn't saying it was BIM, so it was for the BIM person. It suggests it's more all-encompassing, so it's not exclusive. It's inclusive of everyone. It refers to all information. And again, I think that that sort of terminology is a step in the right direction, and it's not dismissed as the digital piece in the corner. It's suggestive of something that's more all-encompassing and inclusive.
I'd really support that comment. I think we try to talk in our business about digital excellence and have that conversation with the client in the same way that you talk about design quality, and high quality information de-risk projects on so many levels. And it's about that cultural shift and focus on the process and information quality as well as product.
Yeah. So for example, when you go through your BSI or BRE accreditation for information management, there's so much more emphasis now on the management of information containers. Historically it might be, how to populate COBE, shows you 3D coordination, which you still do under an ISO, but there's so much more emphasis on master information delivery plans, task information delivery plans, and that places much more emphasis onto the suppliers of information and not relying on the main contractor to just backfill it all. It places more emphasis on the supply chain to step up and say, have you thought about all the information you're going to deliver? To what level of information need are you going to deliver it to? And again, that is a step in the right direction. It's placing more emphasis on everyone to take ownership of the process rather than relying on a select few to translate it and backfill.
I'd agree. I think there's also a call to the technology sector to engage with the construction sector, with the asset sector, because there are off-the-shelf, obviously, common data environment type facilities that you can develop. But I think at scale, the technology sector has the opportunity of bringing in a service that that helps both clients and through the procurement process, then the contractors to be able to amalgamate their data in the right way. So I think there's definitely a call out to the technology sector to get engaged in.
Scott, I thought you were about to say something before. Was that the case, or was I couldn't tell you something? No, cool. Okay, so I actually had another question that sort of pulls into some of what we were just discussing there about there's sort of been in the past a perception that construction hands over the keys and post-occupancy data monitoring and that sort of thing sort of is somebody else's responsibility and may or may not have anything to do with them at all. First of all, do you think that mindset has shifted? Do you think it needs to shift, and how would that all work?
I think it's a fair criticism that there is that sense of we've got the project over the line, move on to the next, and it's difficult to make time to go back, and it's difficult to get the access and information you need once a building's in use. But I think certainly the fire safety agenda rolling program of safety case reviews, clearly structured responsibilities for safety once the building is used is an agenda that's going to shift that. I think the other agenda that will shift it significantly is the environmental agenda, where the technologies that we're integrating into buildings in the years ahead will look very different to the the heating technologies and controls in buildings that we have now. And experience shows that that technology switch can be difficult and can be a bit of a bumpy ride for building owners and building occupiers. So we're going to have to get better at working with the individuals and the families who live in the buildings that we deliver to make sure that they perform successfully.
Yeah, we've obviously got things like the soft landings and what have you as well, which came in to sort of try and address that. And at Waits, we have our own flavour on that called Delivering the Promise, which is a similar sort of approach, and it's a phased handover of information and the building at key gateways. But again, to sort of link back, I know I keep talking about procurement and contracting, something that was a bit more along the lines of an alliancing approach or a partnering minded approach, where it isn't a handover of the keys and walk off, but there is resource attached to it for X amount of years afterwards. It's something that needs to happen. So there is that level of support, and there are forms of procurement that are coming out that are all along those lines, integrated project delivery and all those bits and pieces. But that still isn't the norm. We try and do this sort of soft landings approach, or delivering the promise as we call it. But again, we've still got plenty of space to go, and where that lives again in a digital twin. So who actually owns that digital twin post occupancy, who owns the data, and who inputs into that, and who's the intellectual property integrates with that. And there's so many sort of commercial and procurement minded questions to unpack as a part of that future picture, that really would act as a foundation to drive behavioural change. I think generally the procurement and contracting practices generally pushes the non-BIM people, so to speak, to act to change. And a lot of disciplines sort of change because they have to rather than because they want to. And I think procurement minded approach to incorporate a digital twin, etc. Is where industry needs to shift, and there is ongoing research looking in that space, but it's not quite the norm yet.
Yeah, I'd agree, Ben. I think also if you're a client in this environment and you need to maintain a level of data or information about safety related items, why wouldn't you incorporate all items in that? Why wouldn't you, if you see the value and benefit of understanding about safety and maintenance and optimization, why wouldn't you then include all relevant elements in that over and above safety? And I think that's where we move towards that more sophisticated digital twin, because we understand more about occupation and usage of the asset as we go forwards. So if there's a business case to keeping people safe, making sure that we've got the supply chain data and all the attributes, Ben, that you showed on the door example, really good example. If you've got all of the attributes attributed to that, then why wouldn't you ask that of every supplier that you have, and building that, automating some of that digital twin activity. So I can definitely see that the scope of requirements broadening by demand from the client rather than through regulation.
Brilliant. I'm very conscious we've only got a couple of minutes left because this hour's just flown by. So I think the way I like to wrap up these sessions is I would really love to ask each of you if you sort of had like one call to industry, key point that you'd want everyone to take away to help us all move on this journey that we've been discussing for the last hour. Could you share it with us essentially?
I think mine, I've probably said it too many times already. I'll go for two. I think industry and academia need to align and come to a common understanding of what we understand the digital twin to be and the levels of maturity of a digital twin. And then the second part of that is develop the procurement and contracting practices to support it.
I'd say on a similar theme, I think there's some really good work being done around Interesti around standardizing process, classification, naming conventions, etc. I think so much of this process relies on the seamless flow of information that one of the great frustrations is the blockers to that, which is very often nuts and bolts planning that sits well below your high level objectives for a project. So I think we need to get better at sharing based on standardized formats.
From technical, I'm going to go high level to getting the holistic value across that asset life cycle. If we can articulate that in a clear way, it helps to create demand. So there's regulation, top down, but we need some bottom up demand as well. And I think if we can articulate the value and benefits well enough, then we will get natural demand from the market as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I think that was such a great conversation, covered off a lot of key areas that people are very interested in. So I'd just love to thank you all for your time, because I know it's a big commitment, so I really appreciate it. I'd also like to thank our audience. Always great to have people in and asking questions and engaging. While this is our last session of today, it's not the last session of Digital Building Week. We have 2 sessions tomorrow and 2 sessions on Friday. Tomorrow is all about digital transformation, and Friday is the launch of our new cybersecurity forum. So please come back for those. All the details are on all 3 of our websites' homepages. So thank you to everyone. A big thank you to our panelists, and that's it from me.
Thanks all.
Thank you.